All
So
right.
let's bring in Adam. He, him wants to tell us all about love and proof of the Almighty because of it. So, uh, Adam, can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you.
Welcome.
All right.
Yeah, hello, Paul and Aaron.
Hey.
Good evening or good late evening for you.
Yeah, so just to let you know, my religious background is Catholic, and
Okay.
I thought of calling in to present what is hopefully a fresh topic. I'd like to present to you the Christian view of love, uh, which includes that love is not a material thing, so in keeping with the title of your show, but a metaphysical thing, and to also ask both of you how you understand love. And building on that, I would further claim that Christianity's explanation of love serves as comparative evidence for its truth, as it's more encompassing of spiritual reality when contrasted to other models of love, such as religious models, as well as naturalistic models. Obviously, love is a mystery, and most, if not all, people want to understand it.
Um, is this why you believe in God, or is this, or this you were
Yeah,
just
it's not
this is just something of interest to you?
it's not the reason why I believe in God, no. But it's one of it's something that I see as evidence that can be used to support why Christianity should be a person's religion of choice if they believe in God.
Well, let's start with defining terms. That's always best. What do you mean by, with all the important terms, love and God? Give us what your working definition is so we can be on the same page.
Okay, well, I'd use the Catechism of the Catholic Church to define love. The Catechism 1766 says to us that to love is to will the good of another.
Okay. So, do you agree that, do you believe in evolution?
Yeah,
Okay. Do you believe that one of the primary survival advantages of the human race is that we are a social species, that we work together?
yeah.
Okay. So, given that, would you agree then that as we evolved as a social species, that empathy would be a survival trait that would be favored?
Empathy. Yeah, I mean, if you define empathy in naturalistic terms, but it's not actually how I would define love, though.
Okay, but you just defined love as wanting. Oh, give me your definition of love again, just in case I've forgotten it.
Yeah, so it's the definition that the Catholic Church gives, which is to will the good of another.
Okay. So, what is the difference between empathy and your definition of love?
Well, empathy on a naturalistic framework, empathy would just be a kind of transactional thing where you're just doing something that really supports yourself at the end. Like you're supporting the group so that you get supported.
No, isn't it? Well, is empathy not being able to put yourself in another person's put yourself in another person's shoes, to recognize that I don't like my things being stolen, therefore another person must also not like their things being stolen.
I agree, but that's the problem is that that's transactional.
But that's fine. But but therefore, but you can also, well, how is it transactional? Tell me what the different, tell me what the clarification, what's the distinction with the difference that you're making there between transactional and your version of love?
Okay. Well, I'll explain. I'll just expand on the Christian definition of love first, and then I'll come around to
Okay.
how transactional behaviors don't really fit into that. Well, so in Christianity, love has two manifestations, which are sacrifice and forgiveness. So anything outside of sacrifice and forgiveness isn't love. And as you probably know, the symbol of Christianity is the crucifix, and so there you have represented both sides of the coin of love. There you have Christ's sacrifice of his body and his blood on the cross, and then you have the cross. The cross symbolizes forgiveness, God's forgiveness for mankind, to allow mankind into heaven. There's also in the Catholic Church we also have the Divine Mercy, which is this painting of Jesus with his heart exposed, and out of his heart are these two rays. There's a red ray and a white ray, and the red ray represents blood, which of course symbolizes sacrifice. When something loses blood, its blood only comes from it, so that has to be a kind of sacrifice. And the white ray represents water. Of course, water represents forgiveness, because when you forgive someone, you wash them. You in your mind, you wash them of their moral failures. And so,
Are we
in
getting to the distinction? I don't really need. If this is all part of the point, that's great. We don't
it is,
necessarily
yeah.
need like all the doctrine. So can we move on to where? All right, let's get to the distinction between your kind of love and this transactional problem that you're presenting.
Okay. Well, if you acknowledge that to forgive someone is not transactional, it steps outside of transaction, and to sacrifice something for someone is to go
Wh-
outside of transaction,
Why?
because
No, but I don't. I, my everything in my brain tells me that those are absolutely transactional things. So help me out with how they're not transactional.
okay. Well, when you forgive someone, you're turning your eyes away from whatever it is whatever it is they've done wrong to you. And when you sacrifice something for someone, you're essentially giving something away. You're not it's not a sacrifice if you expect something in return. So forgiveness is just the other
Well,
side of that. It's just turning your eyes away from
that's
what they've done wrong.
that is not. I don't. So when someone said, like, let's say I wanted, if there was someone was barreling down the street and going to hit my kids with a car, or even kids I don't know, and I jump in front and I take that hit instead of them, I'm I'm absolutely doing that for the sake of the group, right?
Maybe. I mean, you could, in that case. I can't tell you what your reasons for doing it are, but what I'm saying is, if you sacrifice yourself, it's you can't possibly benefit from that, because
No, but the
well,
group can
dying.
benefit, right? Like that's absolutely, that you're doing it. Anyone who's sacrificing is doing it in the hopes that someone else will benefit, right?
Yes, but that would be stepping outside of the
But that,
transactional
and
relationship.
someone else is necessarily part of the group.
I agree, yeah, but what I'm saying is the
And
fact
so, as
forgiveness
we
is not
talked about,
transactional for that reason.
but a social species needs some level of sacrifice for the group, for the social species to work, right? If every individual acts on their own, you're not a social species anymore. So I'm failing to understand the distinction that you're trying to make here, that makes that I'm supposed to say dot 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 therefore God. And forgiveness actually ultimately is not always a positive thing. So I don't actually see forgiveness necessarily as a virtue. Forgiveness is often about emotional healing to get over trauma, not necessarily a virtue.
Okay, so I think
So
that the
so
sticking
help
point.
me out with again what distinction I'm supposed to make that jars me out of my naturalistic framework that I'm operating under here, to say that sacrifice is somehow nuanced beyond explanation of group dynamics in evolution.
Okay, so I think the first thing I kind of have to say is basically we have to be careful not to project our own um, non-transactional attitudes, which we definitely have, onto some a theoretical system, so some kind of theoretical naturalistic system. Obviously, we are a part of a naturalistic system, but we have to be careful not to mix together our own, the way that we understand ourselves, with what naturalism might actually consist of. So
Have I
Um,
have I done that?
so what I'm going to say is that right. So you can imagine like a naturalistic system. Say, for example, a different species. It probably helps to not think of human beings. Think of
Hmm.
another species which just operates according to rules where they support each other, like ants, for example. It's hard to say that there would be any forgiveness or sacrifice with ants, and obviously that's to do with their brain structure. But
So
um,
ants sacrifice themselves all the time.
in droves.
Ants are the most sacrificial animal possibly on the planet.
okay, what when I'm talking about, yeah, I guess sacrifice there kind of means
Their own
you know
life.
to
They'll build an underwater bridge where they drown so that other people can cross. Other ants can cross.
okay. Actually, I think that yeah, the ants were probably about a bad example for me to use because most ants don't reproduce. I think it's just the queen that reproduces. So it makes sense for them to have that trait. Um, what I kind of mean is that in like a naturalistic system obeys, shall we say, the rules of evolutionary biology, right? So there's this
Hmm.
drive towards reproductive fitness, and the the group as a system of individuals, they have to um, the, there's like a drive towards resource efficiency. So the group is obviously like a self-enclosed thing with respect to the environment. Like um, each group of organisms has an interaction with the environment, and it's that group is trying to maximize its resources from the environment, right?
Uh, I'm not sure maximizing resources is the right phrase for it, but it is survival, ultimate survival, and then on top of that, thriving once they're past the survival threshold. Does that change your point at all, or is it we're saying the same thing?
What do you mean by passes a certain threshold?
Well, once a group of organisms is no longer like on the cusp of dying, they do aspire to more. They aspire to thrive, right? Like they actually want they'll have even more kids, and they will actually want better quality of life. And I don't just mean humans. Other species will prefer to have a better life for themselves and for their offspring, and subsequently their whatever tribe they're in. And tribe is a very flexible from family unit through to the entire species as a whole. We're definitely able to observe social species once they're not on a will I live or die today, they move into a thrive mode versus. But I'm just wondering, I'm thinking we might be saying the same thing. I just wanted to check.
Yeah, so obviously I agree with R selection and K selection, but I think what's constant over both is that obviously the group is gonna is just gonna reproduce more if they get more resources from the environment. They'll just reproduce more, right?
I would agree generally with that. Yeah.
Yeah. So the problem is that resources act as a constraint on the group, and it also acts as a constraint on each individual. Um, so for one of the individuals to sacrifice something for another individual in the group, um, it kind of implies that the recipient is kind of underperforming, and so the underperforming individual is actually more like a genetic burden onto the group. So it just raises the question: why would naturalism select for that kind of empathy, that kind of non-transactional sacrifice? What I'm trying to say is that on naturalism, it depends on a definition of empathy, where you're defining empathy as just, you know, like the ways that the means of cooperation that the evolutionists selected for. That's kind of what I'm trying to just draw a distinction. The distinction that you're asking for earlier is this kind of naturally selected for means of cooperation with non-transactional sacrifice, which doesn't really seem to have anything to do with driving towards a naturalistic or reproductive end.
Do you disagree that in a social species that the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the one?
Well, the one is included in the many. They're
Of
not actually
course,
separate, right?
but there's then that's why there's a balance, right? That's why we actually they've done experiments with birds and stuff where it's like there's always, even if they have enough, there's always going to be some that steal more, and like but there will be some that give away. Like if the, there will be some variance just genetically about how selfish an individual is. But it's actually the measure is generally within the group, right? Like you have to amortize this over the whole the whole species, or at least the whole tribe, right? That there will be some
Yeah,
you need some level of selfishness so you pass your genes along. You also need some level of selfishness so that your progeny has progeny, right? So there's all these
okay.
dynamics that I just don't. I'm yet to see some aha where it's like, therefore, oh, the gap is divine versus the gap is pragmatic. And
I think
Aaron, I'm going
the
to let you
problem with
take over for me. Go ahead, Adam.
Okay. Yeah. So the problem with the situation that you're bringing up, where there are natural situations where the needs of the many outweigh some individuals. The problem with that is that happens under a specific condition, which is when the group has effectively deemed that the individuals that are just going to be left, they've kind of proven themselves to the group to not be worth genetically reproducing. There's some
So
kind of
okay.
mechanism.
Okay.
And that's
So
the reason
you're
why.
assuming that every transaction that the creatures have perfect knowledge about what the outcomes are. What I'm saying in general is that these are both sacrifice and being selfish are necessary survival traits that will be selected for, and therefore creatures will have these traits. The creatures don't necessarily have to act on those traits in a perfectly survival of the fittest mode, right? If you are if if empathy is a thing that humans have and or other species have, they may well act empathetically even if it's not necessary for their survival. That's all that we're saying, is that these are traits that are easily explainable via evolution, and humans are not any longer in a mode where we are, what's the right phrase, where we're actively involved in survival evolution any longer, right? I'm wearing glasses. I'm correcting for things that in previous generations would be selected against. But I now have children because I had glasses and I was able to survive. These are things that we're no longer in that realm. So humans' empathy, or even other species' empathy, the way we act now, doesn't mean that every single transaction, as you call it, is directly benefiting the next generation necessarily. These are just traits that we've inherited and ran with.
Okay, so I mean, when you said something like sacrifice can happen because of sacrifice or selfishness can happen in the natural environment. Of
Hmm.
course, I mean, what I'm going to say, I agree, but as long as sacrifice is defined in a transactional way or in a way that obeys the rules of having to conserve the resources of the group and having to screen out genetics that are not conducive toward the continued survival of the group. So the question that I'm asking is whether or not evolution supports the inheritance of those kinds of sacrifices we understand it in a non-transactional sense.
Well, I'm not
So if I may
currently
jump in
convinced.
at
Go ahead,
this
Aaron.
point,
Please do. Please
yeah.
take
So
over.
yeah. So to me, it sounds like to say something is non-transactional is basically another way of saying there's no possible benefit from doing this action. Is that fair to say, Adam?
For the individual, yeah.
All right. in that case, to go back to with your theism and specifically Catholicism, I'm afraid based on your definition and your theology, love is impossible. Because if love requires sacrifice, and if you do things that seem loving, you get rewarded by the Christian God, by heaven. The only way love could be possible is if you go and sacrifice your life, there can be no reward for that. But since there's this heavenly reward, you've now actually made love impossible.
Okay, well, the impossibility would only arise if the reason why you're being sacrificed, you're sacrificing yourself, is to get the reward. That's not what. Not.
There's
I'm
only one way
saying
to
that-
guarantee that, to make sure there is no such reward.
No, it's subjective. So it's when you so obviously God in the theology, God is omniscient. So God can read your mind, so He knows your intents with things. Is that, I mean, the position of the church is that if you do things in order to get a reward,
In
if
that
you do
case, actually now you've made your situation worse, honestly, because now you're basically saying the only way that you can commit a loving act is to do it separate from theism. That you have to do it irrespective of your beliefs about the afterlife. So quite honestly, I think what you've done is shown that the way love can only exist is outside of the almighty transaction system.
No, the position isn't that it's outside of theism. So if I say that it's outside of wanting the reward, that's not the same as saying it's outside of theism. The Carmelite tradition, as well as the writings of the saints and the church, they do say that if that there are stages of spiritual development. Obviously, in the early stages, you are kind of doing things out of some desire for heaven and some desire to leave behind the materialistic concerns. But as you go deeper, eventually you do it out of pure love for God. That's eventually what you're supposed to be doing.
The thing is, again, I think you're just showing that love is impossible, because if I do a loving act, I do it for the person I'm loving. If I'm doing it for someone else, again, that sounds very transactional. It sounds incoherent at that point. If I'm doing something for the sake of someone who's not even part of the transaction, part of the activity, it sounds like, I don't even know what that sounds like at this point. If I'm showing love for my wife, I'm pretty sure that's because it's something between the two of us. I don't need a third party to give the thumbs up that I'm loving correctly.
That's not exactly what I'm saying. So if you do an act of sacrifice or forgiveness for someone else, the fact that it's for someone else is that is interpreted in the church as being the same as doing it for God, because there's this saying that love of God is the same as love of neighbor. Obviously, those are the two main commandments as well. In the theology, those two things are tied together. The way that you treat other people is kind of like a reflection of the way that you treat God.
And why is the reason we should treat people that way? Like, what is the argument that one would give why we should treat people that certain way?
So do you mean with sacrifice and forgiveness? Do you mean?
Yeah.
Because so that comes down to morality, obviously. Well, obviously, the explanation of morality in the church is to do with sin and virtue. And the virtues reflect God's character, which is to provide things with life. And obviously, there's these different virtues.
What the problem is, though, now you're getting into what the philosophers would call divine command theory. And the problem is divine command theory has been basically shown to have been incoherent for the last 24 centuries, thanks to Plato.
Okay, what do you mean?
Literally, one of Plato's famous dialogues, the Euthyphro dilemma, that comes from his play, or not, I should say play, his dialogue, the Euthyphro, about are the gods saying things because it is moral, or are they saying moral things because they're gods? Basically, is it that this is just merely commanded and it's arbitrary, or is there something external to the gods that actually shows what's good or not good? And I think it's now the same sort of thing here. If there is a reason to do something, then you can tell me what that reason is. And if you're saying that's just what God does, then you're just saying it's arbitrary. And the thing is, I think we can argue something a little bit better than arbitrary. This is what just this one being happens to really be into.
Okay.
But I think this is also quite irrelevant compared to what you were saying before. You basically said that something to be a sacrifice, then there has to basically be no reward for that. That has to be the way that you don't have the transaction. But the only way you can have that is if there is no reward for doing the good thing. The problem is, Christians tell me there's a heavenly reward for doing the good thing. So I'm saying on your system, love is impossible, or at least your system of love is incoherent. And I'm also going to point out it's also a weird thing, because if the only way love can be done is through sacrifice, does that mean I don't love my wife right now because I'm not like shedding blood right now? That sounds weird.
Well, no, sacrifice is just for example, it can be as small as just sacrificing comfort. Like you might prefer to, hypothetically, you might prefer to play video games than to make her a cup of tea. So instead, if you make her a cup of tea, then that's a form of sacrifice, because you're sacrificing
And
your own desires.
and do you not yourself receive a reward when you make someone else tea? Do you not
Well,
receive a dopamine hit for feeling good for doing that? Do you not get favors down the road potentially from that person? I mean, I'm just
Sometimes.
curious what you might give. Do you have an example? Do you have an example of such an act that is purely altruistic?
Say, for example, if there's a homeless person, and you have some kind of some religious belief that if you give away some money, then that's a commendable thing. The homeless person obviously can't offer you anything. So
Well,
also,
Here's the thing,
no,
though.
but
if you
If
imagine
I
like
give a homeless person money, I actually feel good about helping them at least a little
right.
bit. And that can also be a reward. So it seems like, again, to really make this a sacrifice, I have to give money away and feel bad about it at the same time.
yeah, but that's possible. Like, so if say for example, if you're someone who really dislikes, for example, Trump supporters, and you realize the homeless person's Trump supporter, and then you could hate every single second of what you're doing, but what you're doing would still, donating that money would still fit the definition of love on the Catholic Church. It's to will the good of another. So it's about will. It's not about feelings. So it's
But
love
in
is an
this
act of
scenario,
will.
are you not? Isn't your reward, as Aaron pointed out, forget the rewards in heaven, but isn't the reward you got that you did something that pleased God? Like you're basically people pleasers do things all the time because what they want is affirmation. It sounds like in that scenario that was someone who wanted affirmation from God.
I think that the relevant distinction here is between reasons and consequences. You're bringing up receiving a reward as a consequence of the moral action, whereas what I'm saying, what the church says, is that what's important is that your reason.
I understand, but what we're looking for is this gap that should convince us that you said basically you opened this up by saying love and the existence of this love is evidence that there is something beyond materialism. And
Yeah.
right now, I have yet to hear anything that should make me think, and I could be incredibly wrong, and I'm hoping that you can give me this answer. There's a gap between what I'm thinking about as love and what you're thinking about as love. And I'm still anxious to look for what that gap is. And you've identified various things, and Aaron and I keep saying, well, no, it still seems naturalistic to us. So what are we missing? I think that's what we're looking for. What are we missing?
Well, which question were you pointing to now? So you were asking before about
What's
what
this?
what the gap is to thinking that
Yeah, the
it's
gap
non-materialistic.
between this the kind of love that we see as fully explainable by materialism and what you're imagining that says love isn't explainable by materialism.
That comes back to the kind of distinctions we were making earlier, where a natural, like an evolutionary system, so a biological system where genes are inherited and everything's constrained by resources. The kind of rules that the psychology of the species obeys is concerned with conserving resources and screening out quote unquote bad individuals, or like individuals with phenotypes that indicate lack of fitness.
That is how
Under
the
those
system
conditions,
operates, but that's not how individuals operate, right?
I'm sorry,
We
could you
went
repeat that?
over that. we went over that. So that is how the system overall operates, but it's not how individuals and individual actions operate. The
How
system
can you
allows for the
divide it?
fluctuate. The system allows for the fluctuation.
I don't understand how right. So any fluctuation is just going to be detrimental to the system.
No, it allow
It's the
like
problem.
you can absolutely have selfish lions that go around and kill the cubs of their brothers because they don't want the competition. But that lion ends up
I
getting
agree.
shunned when they do that too often, right? So absolutely, some of the individual actions were detrimental to the group. Or we have in our history, we had Germany who went a little bit rogue for a while there. But as a system, the rest of the planet wasn't just going to say, "Well, this is fine. Let's just let that happen." The rest of the planet eventually came together and said, maybe this isn't going to be good for us. So like there's macro level. What you're talking about is true at the macro level, but we don't need it to be true for every individual action.
Yeah, but what you're arguing is that empathy, the kind of empathy that you believe is normative. Like you're arguing that it's distributed across the whole group, not that it's just some kind of aberration. It's,
No, my argument
that's
is
the
that
result
is
of.
my argument is that the empathy that we feel, and I don't know, I've yet to hear a difference between love and empathy, uh, is explainable as a survival trait in social species. And everything you've
Right. So
described, even with your sacrifice, still seems explainable as a survival trait for groups. You haven't given me anything yet that makes me say, "Oh, well, that's outside material norms."
okay. So when you were saying that something can like that there's variation between individuals in the group,
Hmm.
right? Despite the fact that like the group has to obey these. As far as I understand, you've agreed with the model where the individuals of the group are subject to scarcity with resources, and as a result of scarcity, they're subject to this kind of screening at the group level, where if they're defective, then they don't reproduce. Are you saying that it's empathy that's normative across that, or that it's selfishness that's normative across that?
I'm saying that we have to have survival species absolutely have to have both of those functions, because if you had a creature that was not taking care of itself enough to produce a next generation, any species like that would die off. And any species that is completely filled with everyone selfish and doesn't perform empathy, that species would also die off. So in terms of, if any social species that is going to survive must at a macro level find a balance between those two things. Both things are necessary in the biological organism.
Yeah, but I mean, I agree that there's a
Um,
balance between the
if I
two.
may also, just
Yeah.
because, this is kind of a question of what are the facts on the ground. So I was quickly trying to do some searching through the scientific literature, and here's a paper, and this is looking at non-human species, I believe. In intergroup conflict, self-sacrifice is stronger among pro-social individuals, and parochial altruism urges especially among cognitively taxed individuals. This is from Frontiers in Psychology 2015. So just to point out that there's actually research out there to explore the question of uh, these sorts of things. Can we find examples of self-sacrifice even in non-human animals? Does it actually show advantages for the group when that exists? And there's evidence pointing out there. So I don't think there's really much reason to debate whether there would or would not be. I'm saying when I do a quick literature search, the evidence is already there that that's what does happen.
Okay, but the question is whether or not um, uh, self-sacrifice there just of course it benefits the group. The question is what was the mechanism by which that happened? Was the individual in question just defective, and that kind of triggered some kind of function in the mind of the self-sacrificing individual, where all right, you've got to sacrifice yourself now to benefit the genetic um, integrity of the group as a whole, because that's normally the explanation that I get.
Or it could be that there's a matter of kin, because here's the thing: when we're talking about protecting, very often we're also talking about protecting one's offspring. that clearly is going to be carrying genetic lineage. Even if you're sacrificing someone in your group, you're probably then sacrificing yourself for the sake of cousins who have a lot of similar genetics to you as well. So fact of the matter is, if you are sacrificing for these rather small groups, which like our early ancestors would have been in, you're basically sacrificing yourself for your offspring or close cousins. And so, yeah, there's still a genetic inheritance that way if you are a kind of self-sacrificing individual, and those sorts of genes then would get transmitted.
So you say they would or wouldn't get transmitted?
Would, because you have that genetic similarity to other people in your tribe, sometimes even your actual kin, your actual offspring.
Okay, but it's just a group of similar alleles and genes that get passed on. It can't be
That's evolution.
those of the individual itself. Yeah.
Individuals don't evolve, though. They pass on their genes, and the genes that lead to more successful groups are more likely to continue, persist, and evolve.
Yeah, but anything that evolves had to have a living ancestor. Like it can't have had an ancestor that self-sacrificed before it got to a chance.
Here's the thing, though. Individuals, okay, here's the thing. We're both individuals, but if you look at us genetically, we're like 99.9% identical. You'd have to check really hard to make sure that we're not clones, which means if one of us survives and carries on genetically, a huge amount of the same genes gets passed on. And especially so if we're talking about small tribes where the people who survive are first or second cousins or even your direct offspring. So literally your genes, your direct genetic code being copied out and sent into children. If that survives, then obviously your genetic legacy carries on. And so again, that would show evolution advantage if an individual sacrifices themselves so that way their offspring survive.
Okay, I mean, I agree.
And we find extreme examples of this where literally a mother will basically be with its like clutch of eggs. Like I've seen this in stories of octopuses, for example, that basically are fill themselves up with fertilized eggs, sit on the bottom of the ocean, and basically sit there for years and die and effectively become food for their newborns. That's the ultimate form of self-sacrifice I can think of.
Okay. Well, the main problem that I'm seeing is that those situations are situations where what the group, some kind of implicit mechanism in the group has decided that one individual's genetics is more expendable than another, and so there's still that transactional aspect to it. So you just have the group behaving as a kind of resource management entity, which is then just judging, it's just discarding individuals that are defective for the benefit of the rest, and that you have the transactional aspect right there.
Adam, can you still hear us? I apologize for the technical issues.
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, yeah, I don't know. Apparently Paul had electrical issues and my system also decided to say that was enough the line for tonight. So apologies for that.
That's okay. Anyway, it was a nice conversation. It's a shame I couldn't get on to the part where I was going to talk about the Eucharist or anything like that, or to argue that love is non-materialistic. But I think there's plenty to think about there.
Let's try this one more time. This is not the normal. So apparently we are being attacked by ghosts of Christmas past. Christmas present might be coming in soon.
Okay.
All right. So I completely rebooted my browser. So in theory, that'll make things better. But as I said, that's just a theory. And I've been wrong plenty already. All right. So I apologize, Adam.
Aaron, I think it was an interesting enough conversation. I'm going to have to go. So.
Oh, yeah, I apologize for keeping you hanging like that. I do thank you for calling in. Obviously, we didn't make as much progress as we wanted to in the discussion, but well, what can I say? Questions of love usually take a lot of background info to even start making sense. And well, I do a lot of things out of love that don't make sense, so it's hard to justify it here and now.
Yeah, mostly I was just aiming to provide some kind of content that was interesting for the listeners, and to maybe go over some ground that doesn't get spoken about a lot, which is the whole evolutionary stuff.
Hmm. Yeah, and from what I understand, there is a lot of work that people have been doing on the evolution of altruism, empathy, things that we consider love. And I'm no expert about it. I've seen chimps at the zoo, but that makes me no primatologist. But from what I can tell, people like Francis van der Waal and others who have done, especially like research on chimps and bonobos, have found examples of things that definitely look a lot like what we consider at least proto-morality, if not the full-blown thing. But again, I'm no primatologist, and I don't want to overspeak outside of my area expertise. I wish Erica were on, since she has much more of that knowledge base. But again, thank you for calling in,
Okay.
and please call again in the future.
Thank you. Bye bye.
Right, bye-bye.